May we start?
I want to get your opinion on something.
To the bigger picture.
Now it's time.
From B Media Production, this is Podcasting Essentials.
Hi, and welcome to episode 4 of season 3. I'm Nick Schildberger, Managing Director of B Media Production. This episode, we dive deep into audio production. What makes a great sounding podcast? What are the myths and best practices around getting your podcast audio just right? We're joined this episode by Pete Letts, Director of Audio and Podcasting here at B Media Production. Normally on the other side of the glass, recording what we say and then making us sound good, he's snuck into the studio today to tell us what we need to know to get the best sounding podcast. G'day, Pete.
Hi, Nick.
And returning this episode, my regular co-host, Chris Ashmore.
G'day, Nick. Actually, one thing I want to know is if Pete is here in the studio, who's recording this and listening to the sound levels? I think it's like, was it Lois Lane and Superman in that iconic first Superman in the 1970s movie where Lois is looking up at Superman saying, "You got me, who's got you?" It's kind of like this now, don't you think?
Yeah, it is a bit. Look, I've been here for so long that I know exactly where to adjust the level of the microphone. Plus, I'm wearing my headphones, which I'll talk about in a sec, the importance of wearing headphones, so I can hear any issues that might come up. So, yeah, all good.
Oh, but you're a master. You're a master. But before we start grilling Pete, there's one thing the last couple of weeks, Nick, that I've noticed. There's a blog by Stephen Goldstein called Blogstein where he quotes this statistic from Jacob Media Tech Survey about discoverability of podcasts. I don't know if you noticed it, Nick.
I did.
And 78% of discoverability of podcast is through word of mouth.
I could not believe that when I saw it.
It's incredible, isn't it? Offline, it's 40% through colleagues or workmates or friends or family, that kind of thing. 38% online on social media, reviews, that kind of thing. And it just goes to show that to market your podcast, you've just got to tell everybody in your network, but it's also got to be good enough for people to refer it. So I just thought that was interesting.
And particularly guests on your show, if you do a really good job of an episode interviewing someone, they'll spread the word as well. But if you only do a sort of okay-ish job, then they're probably not going to pass it on.
That's right. That's right.
And also from that same blog, only 17% of discoverability comes from iTunes and Apple Podcasts.
There you go. But the amount of time and words spoken about using iTunes and writing reviews and plugging your podcast via that platform, well, not many people are looking for new shows through it, I think. Well, it's only 17%, so...
Yeah, again, I was surprised by that as well.
That's right.
Well, let's get to our specialist in the studio. Pete, first question. From a technical point of view, what are some of the biggest mistakes you hear in podcasts?
Well, yeah, I get sent a lot of audio that's pre-recorded and clients ask me to edit it and make a show out of their raw audio. But most of the mistakes I see time and time again are related to how they've recorded their audio. So levels too high, so there's distortion, or too low, which just brings up the noise floor, so it adds to the hiss on the recording. The other main issue is the environment that they're recording in. So it's essential whenever you're recording, in most cases, you won't have an audio engineer with you monitoring everything. So it's up to the podcaster to listen to everything. So there might be an air conditioner duct that you listen to every day, so you don't think much of it, because our ears are very good at attenuating anything that doesn't have much meaning at a particular point in time. Whereas a microphone will just hear everything. It doesn't distinguish between sounds. So if you're recording something, say, at your home office, without headphones on, you won't notice a humming fridge or the clock ticking on the wall or things like that, whereas the microphone will pick all that up. I've even had podcasts where there's been an open window and there's birds chirping outside, there's traffic noise. So the first thing I heard was, my God, why did you continue with the recording? The first thing you should have done is shut the window, or if the birds are that loud, move to a different location. So it's absolutely essential whenever you're recording, leave your headphones on. Also things like pops. If you're asking a question, you might hear a really large pop into the microphone. They can be quite tricky to get rid of and are pretty distracting for the listener. So things like that, you can just restart your question or alternatively, the talent. If it's a one-on-one recording, you can just say, oh, you're popping a little bit into the microphone there, so just move back a little bit. and you'll end up with a much nicer end product for the listener. So they're the two sort of biggest ones. It's really just getting away from that'll do mentality, as I call it.
What do you mean by that'll do?
Well, it's the notion that it's just audio. It's so easy to make a recording. Anyone can hold up an iPhone and, I can record the interview, in the middle of the street. It doesn't really matter. It's all about the content anyway. Well, that's not true. It's all about the experience for the listener. Of course, the content's important, but you really need to educate yourself about your gear and really be aware of where you're recording. Find a nice quiet spot. Unless if you're recording an interview where like a noisy cafe will have meaning or context, then by all means. But in that noisy cafe, you'd ideally still need to find a nice quiet corner or something where that noise is just in the background. I see too many podcasters who try to perform noise reduction on, say, a noisy cafe or something, to try to reduce that background noise, and it's just impossible. It introduces way too much artifacting into the recording, and it just ruins it. And, the listener doesn't want to be struggling to hear what's being said above that background noise. The that'll do mentality also extends to gear. So, don't waste your time investigating gear. Just, your iPhone can make a recording. Well, at the end of the day, you're competing with the Gimlets and the Pacific Contents, the ABCs of the world, and they're all done in professional studios. So if all your podcasts are recorded on an iPhone or in the middle of a reverberant living room that sounds like you've just picked up your iPhone and recorded it in the middle of your living room, well, you just can't compete.
And I suppose, the best possible recording really is to utilise a studio if you can, having two people in the same room, in the same studio at the same time. So that leads to this question, Pete. If someone was to set up their own studio, what's the minimum they should do in terms of equipment, for example?
Well, the most important thing is obviously a microphone and something to record onto. So that's first and foremost. Then you'll need a PC or a Mac so you can label and export the files to be sent off to an editor, which is obviously what I'd recommend. And obviously if you're doing an online recording, you'll need the computer so that you can dial up Skype or Zencaster or whatever it is that you're using. If you do a lot of one-on-one recordings in addition to your remote recordings, I'd recommend a portable recorder like a Zoom device. At B Media Production, we use an H6, which is fantastic. It's very flexible, has heaps of inputs, can be used as an audio interface. So you can hook it up to a laptop and plug in your XLR microphone, because you've got two different types of microphones, your XLR or a USB microphone. The majority of podcasters use USB microphones because it's easy. You just plug it straight into your laptop. I prefer the portable recorder because you can't really plug multiple microphones into a computer. You can really only select one device at a time. That'd be the minimum equipment-wise that you'd be looking at. Then there's also, if you have a space at home where you want to record, you need to treat that space. You want to cut down on all the reflections that you can. So you might get some acoustic tiles that you can stick on the wall next to the microphone or something, or some carpet on your desk or something, just to calm those reflections down. You want a nice tight recording. You don't want to sound like you've recorded in your bathroom or toilet or something, which some rooms, and again, if you don't have your headphones on, it might not sound that reverberant. But as I said before, the microphone picks up everything. So if you stand in the middle of your living room and put on some headphones, depending on the size of that room, it can sound like you're in a cathedral, even though you might be just in your living room.
And XLR microphones don't need to be hugely expensive, do they, Pete?
They don't have to be hugely expensive. I always recommend purchase the best that you can afford at the time. So for our face-to-face setup, if we're one-on-one, we'll take our Zoom H6 and a couple of dynamic XLR microphones, which are Shure SM58s. I mean, they're just industry standard vocal microphones. If you've ever been to a gig at a pub, the singer 99 out of 100 times will be up there holding an SM58. And they're robust. If you're going somewhere for a face-to-face recording and taking your portable setup, the last thing you want is an expensive, delicate condenser microphone. So whereas in our studio here, we use, well, they're quite expensive, some AKG 414 microphones, condenser microphones. Well, I wouldn't dream of taking them out on the road. Well, of course you can, but the cheaper dynamic 58s will capture the audio very well, provided we stick to good mic technique and all that sort of thing and environment, and we pay attention to all those things that I mentioned before.
Now, you mentioned earlier, Pete, about mistakes that you hear when you listen to podcasts in terms of recording, but you do a lot of editing and you probably are attuned to editing mistakes as well in podcasts. What are some of the main problems that you notice with other people's podcasts?
Well, a lot of podcasters will use, say, Zencaster when they have a remote recording. One of the biggest problems I'm hearing is a lot of what's called artifacting in the audio. So they're switching on the automatic noise reduction and auto compression and auto leveling stuff, or some of them have you can cut down on delay or reverb and that sort of thing. There's not really any such thing as like an auto setting. You really need to know what you're doing with that sort of thing to get the best result. And once it's recorded that way, well, you're sort of stuck with it. So I always recommend, if podcasters aren't that technical with that side of things, turn all of that auto noise reduction and leveling stuff off and leave it to someone who understands that type of thing and can do any necessary noise reduction or gating, things like that. Now, a lot of podcasters do have a crack at editing their own podcasts. So I'll receive already edited interviews and I'm just asked to assemble and master the programs. In a lot of those situations, I hear a lot of clipping of words and clipping of breaths. So basically something's just edited in the wrong place and it sounds unnatural. There's also cadence or inflection changes. So they've edited in a strange place in the middle of words or at the end of the word or something, and they've come in a bit later on in the interview and the inflection's completely wrong, things like that. Anything that makes the interview sound unnatural, you're just taking from the experience of the listener. So if it sounds weird, either find an alternative way to edit it or leave it. Or, as I said before, send your programs off to a pro to do it.
I think a lot of listeners will probably have their eyes glaze over because they just don't edit at all. They just press record and then they press stop, and that's the podcast.
Yeah, well, that's the other end of the spectrum. A lot of podcasters just find it difficult to chop any of their content out. I mean, many podcasters put a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of work into their interviews and feel that, they recorded for an hour, so the podcast ends up an hour 30 seconds by the time you add the opener on the top. But it's essential to edit because it's not about you, it's about the listener. I mean, who wants to listen to someone bumbling along, constantly repeating the same point or something, or just cut it out. Or if there's a Q&A that doesn't go anywhere, cut it out. Just because you've recorded it, you don't have to leave it in there. We shouldn't leave it in there. And I've heard in the past, people bringing up authenticity and, no, I like my podcast to be authentic, so I don't like editing it too much. Well, that's just an excuse for being lazy. I mean, that's purely making everything about yourself. As I said before, it's about the listener. You're taking from their experience. Poor editing, or the opposite, not editing anything, you're just detracting from the listener's experience and they'll end up just not listening anymore. So, yeah.
Now, Pete, you're an audio engineer by trade and you've been dealing with audio for longer than podcasts have been around. So how do you describe what you actually do?
Well, on a daily basis, we do a lot of recordings with external studios. We're lucky enough here to have a long-standing relationship with the ABC, so we utilise their studios all around the country, regional and metro. So it's liaising with them to make sure everything's in order. We're linked to those studios via ISDN, so it's making sure everything's connecting okay and the devices are talking to each other. Then it's the actual recording session, so setting all the levels, monitoring everything, listening out for any pen clicking or tapping on the table or something. I'll put my producer hat on and listen for anything that might be politically incorrect or factually incorrect or any phrases that could be said more fluently. I'll just jot those down during the interview and ask the interviewee to say them again at the end of the recording. We're all producers here, so that attention to detail is just what we do. When it comes to the editing, all those retakes, I'll put those into the main body of the interview. Our producers, Chris and Heather, will write up some edit notes for any of the content they want removed. So I'll do those edits, and then I'll go through what we call a cleaning process. So I'll edit out any ums and ahs, hesitations, awkward pauses and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's basically just tidying everything up the best way we can for the listener. But we always maintain the pace and rhythm or beat of the speaker, so they're always left sounding completely natural. Like I mentioned before, anything that sounds unnatural or any weird edits or anything that draws the listener's attention to it, it just takes from their experience. Once the editing's done, then I'll just assemble the programs. So I host a lot of our podcasts, so I'll record my voiceover, I'll add the music, and then it won't go too technical, but it's all the EQ and compression and limiting and that sort of thing before we finally export the final program.
Now, a lot of organisations inquire about recording audio from a stage event or a seminar or a function and repurposing that for a podcast. I know what your thoughts are, but tell me, what are your thoughts about that, Pete?
Yeah, repurposing seminars, it's fine. It can work, but there are limitations. I mean, most seminars aren't equipped to record professional multi-track audio, which is what you'd want for editing and production. You want multi-track. You don't want one mono recording of a whole bunch of different speakers at different levels. But in the majority of cases, that's exactly what it is. So you're basically at the mercy of the skills of the AV person who's recording the session on the day. Some of it can be fixed, obviously, in post-production, but ideally you want your audio in the most flexible format, which would be individual tracks. But you really need more sort of advanced skills here. So
would it be fair to say that if you're thinking of repurposing the audio from a seminar or a function, that actually maybe it's better, and this is what we do or what we advise, is just to interview those speakers at a later date. They can be more succinct. A seminar is usually often a visual thing. They're using PowerPoints, they're using their arms and their hands and their facial gestures. Yep. So you're not going to pick up on the nuances as you would if it was specifically for a podcast. Would that be fair to say, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Seminars will often use extra visuals and things to reinforce the stuff that's being said on stage. That won't always translate into audio. And those presentations can be pretty dry. And audiences much prefer the intimacy of a one-on-one recording as opposed to someone presenting on a stage to a packed concert hall, you know. Many recordings of a seminar will have that big, reverberant sort of auditorium sound. And, going back to the experience of the listener, it just detracts from that. An up-close, well-recorded conversation is so much more engaging for them.
Now, Pete, I want to ask you about, not just from a technical viewpoint, but from a producer's viewpoint, what are your thoughts about podcasting in general?
Generally, content is improving. I mean, 15 years ago, podcasting consisted of a lot of dictaphone-type recordings of various ramblings with little editing and production. Since Serial, I guess, people have been inspired to put more effort into their shows. People these days are putting a lot of effort into researching their topic and putting more thought into the structure of their show and thinking about their audience a little more. But, there's still a heap of room for improvement, though. But we're in a bit of a holding pattern, I suppose, waiting to see what's going to happen with Spotify and Gimlet and, what's going to happen with advertising, paywalls, that sort of thing. And with the growth in audio technology, I mean, home theatres, all our devices, we're used now to high bit rates and high sample rates. And consumers just expect broadcast quality audio. It's just expected now. So it's getting to the point now where you can't get away with your crappy recording on your $5 microphone anymore. And podcasters are starting to realise that. So, it's good. Still a long way to go, but overall it's pretty positive.
So what's coming next, Pete?
What's next? Well, we've already seen the uptake of the smart speaker and using the voice to launch a podcast or turn on a light at your home or even turn on the shower or whatever. So the voice recognition thing will continue, and along a similar line, AI or machine learning will just get better and better. Machine learning-based algorithms have existed for a while in a heap of audio plugins, mainly to do with mic noise and lifting dialogue out of noisy backgrounds, and also getting rid of clicks and pops and that sort of thing, and various mastering-related processes. But we'll continue to see major improvements here, and that type of thing allows us to not be so bogged down in the technical nitty-gritty that can detract from our creativity. And I think we'll also see an increased uptake in immersive audio and what's known as object-based audio delivery. So tech like Dolby Atmos, which a lot of us have already experienced at the cinema, we're used to surround sound. Dolby Atmos adds a height component. So you've got speakers in the roof as well, just to add another dimension. So Dolby Atmos and the use of binaural audio recordings, that makes it possible to create a completely immersive experience for the listener through headphones.
Could you explain what binaural audio is?
Binaural audio can be reproduced through a properly configured speaker setup, but a pair of headphones is the easiest way to experience it. So the sound is captured exactly the same way that our ears hear it. It uses two special microphones that capture the exact location of a sound. So the easiest way is to demonstrate it. So here's an example of a knock at the door recorded with the binaural method. And again, you'll need to listen through headphones to get the best effect. So here we go. And I'll do that one more time. So you'll probably look to your right or left, thinking that someone was banging on your wall or something.
Oh, yeah, wow, that's really amazing.
It's very different to just a stereo sound, which doesn't really have that same localization. So that's just a tiny example of the type of immersive experience we can expect down the track with podcast production. And Netflix, Apple and Amazon Prime have already been producing content in the Dolby Atmos format, and a lot of games have it. Dolby has an app for the Xbox One and Windows 10, and that lets you experience Dolby Atmos through any set of headphones. So, yeah, having that fully immersive experience with podcasts is just around the corner, I reckon. But I also mentioned object-based audio. That's not just immersive sound and Dolby Atmos stuff. Object-based audio allows the delivery of content to the end user where they can adjust the sound level between content elements. So eventually, if you're listening to a podcast on, say, a train, you'll be able to raise the level of the narration so you can hear the story above the loud background noise. And this has applications for the hard of hearing, where they can raise the level of any element they choose so they can increase intelligibility and give them an appropriate mix of the content that's custom to their requirements. So eventually the podcast won't be a static MP3 audio file as it is now. It'll consist of a bunch of audio objects that can be manipulated by the end user so they can control the audio from, a full normal mix with music and effects through to just the narration on its own. So, yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Well, thanks, Pete. I think that's about all we have time for today, but thank you very much for joining us in the studio. I know you just love getting on this side of the glass.
Pleasure. I'm a long-time fan, first-time contributor, so yeah, it was a lot of fun.
We'll have to get you back in here again. And thank you too, Chris, for being here. That's it for this episode of Podcasting Essentials. For more about us and how we can help you use audio content to build engagement, go to be.com.au. From all of us at Be Media Production, thanks so much for listening.